Now being here in Sweden, I feel like I'm a whole lot more retrospective and I'm living a little bit more in the present. I still have a lot of work to do on that, but that's something that I'm really trying to work on, is taking it easy, spending time really thinking back about the past.
Olá pessoal, sejam bem-vindos ao meu canal. Meu nome é Natália, mas você pode me chamar de Nath. Eu adoro reagir e aprender sobre outros países, especialmente aqueles que são bem diferentes do meu, em termos culturais e econômicos. Então, se você gosta desse tipo de conteúdo, fica à vontade para se inscrever. Eu vou adorar ter você por aqui. Bom, nesse vídeo eu vou reagir a 10 jeitos suecos que me mudaram como americano. Então é isso, sem mais delongas, e vamos para a reação.
If your dreams do not scare you, they are not big enough. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Brandon here, registered nurse from the United States, living and working in Sweden since 2021. I wanted to do a video about 10 ways that I have changed as an American since living in Sweden. There is a typical caricature of what an American is like, and I typically don't fit that mold. I have always felt a little bit more comfortable whenever I travel in Europe. Since coming to Sweden in 2021, I have noticed some changes in my behavior, and I kind of want to talk about those. Now, this is more from a mostly positive perspective. There are, of course, other things that I think maybe are of a more negative nature, but I really want to focus on the positive. Number one, recycling. So coming from the United States, recycling is definitely not as big of a deal as it is here in Sweden. Now, the United States is a big place with 50 states and a third of a billion people. Things vary from state to state and city to city. But I can say definitely in Europe, I'm very impressed with how methodically people recycle their things. Not just glass, but different colors of glass. In the United States, when I was growing up, where I grew up, it was just outside the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we really didn't have much recycling. What we did have was ways to raise money by recycling cans. We would take them to school, and a lot of times it was for some sort of money-raising event, for maybe a charity type event. We also could take the cans into a local recycling place and get money for them. Aluminum was worth a lot of money. At the grocery stores, I remember in the local little grocery stores, they had a box by the entrance where you could return all of your plastic bags, where they would go back to recycling. There were some people that recycled newspapers, but for the most part, recycling was not like a really big thing in the United States when I was younger. As I've gotten older, they have started incorporating recycle cans in many of the cities in Texas. But something that is interesting is they're very strict about what you can put in there. So you can't just put like a pizza box in there because, of course, then there is pizza grease all over the box, and so you can't reuse it. I have been told, and I don't know if it's true, but kind of what I've heard through the grapevine is a lot of times, even though you put all the things that could be recycled in a recycle bin and then all the non-recyclable items in the other can, that a lot of times the stuff in the recycle bin ends up being sent to the landfill anyway. I've even seen, with my experience of renting out a property to people, that people really don't know about recycling, or at least they're too lazy to do it. And so they'll just throw everything in the recycle bin that is not recyclable, and they just mix everything up. For myself, coming to Sweden, this was a change for me. I had to get used to the process of creating a system and recycling all my stuff. So I can say definitely that is a big thing for the positive. That is a change in myself. Number two, proficiency.
Gente, eu sempre adoro falar o quanto eu admiro vocês por isso, porque realmente é uma coisa muito importante, né? Eu imagino que deva ter sido até um choque cultural para ele, visto que no país dele já não é uma coisa tão forte como é na Suécia, né? Aqui no Brasil é a mesma coisa, a reciclagem ainda é uma coisa muito, muito pequena e definitivamente não é motivada. Eu acredito que na Suécia deva haver muitos incentivos, né? Especialmente para a questão de deixar os lugares apropriados para se fazer isso. Então, acaba não sendo uma dificuldade tão grande, eu acho. Mas, realmente, eu vejo que vocês se importam muito com isso. Eu fiquei sabendo que os suecos também gostam muito de coisas de segunda mão. Me confirma aqui nos comentários se é verdade, porque eu acho que isso faz sentido, né? Porque visto que tudo isso visa realmente cuidar do meio ambiente. Então, eu acho fascinante esse traço de vocês.
Proficiency in a language. I did study French and I studied Spanish growing up in high school. I never really felt like I got proficient with those languages. In fact, today, if I look at something that's written in those languages, a lot of times I can kind of figure out what it's saying, depending on how complicated it is. And I know more Spanish than French, of course, and so I can say certain phrases in Spanish and sometimes make my point across, but my Spanish is horrible. Then later on, I started learning Vietnamese. I had a lot of friends that were Vietnamese, and I actually got involved in some work in the religious organization I was part of, and so we had a focus with the Vietnamese community, and I had a lot of friends there in the congregation that were Vietnamese, and so I learned to speak Vietnamese, and I got up to a certain level, but I never felt truly like I could say I was fluent in the language. Now, living here in Sweden, this is my first experience ever in living in another country, and because of that, I've been around the language all the time. I speak Swedish more than I speak English, because all my patients speak Swedish, my coworkers speak Swedish, and then I live at home alone. So I'm hearing Swedish TV, Swedish radio, I'm reading signs everywhere in Swedish, and this has really helped me get to a point where I feel like I can confidently say I am fluent in the language. I will always be learning, I will always have an accent, there will always be certain types of words that I'm not familiar with. Like, for example, if I'm working on a car, I don't know a lot of the words for the different parts of the car, but that's the way it is. Even if it was in my English language, if it was words talking about a certain type of activity that I'm not familiar with, I wouldn't know those words. So that's just the way it is. But yes, I would say that is a big thing for the positive. So this is the first time I can say in my life I feel like proud of myself that I've gotten up to this level of proficiency in a language, and now it's increased my confidence in maybe perhaps taking on another language. Maybe it's Danish, maybe Arabic, who knows? What do you think I should learn as a next language? Number 3, I am outside.
Gente, eu achei ele muito inteligente por aprender sueco assim tão rápido, porque o sueco é muito difícil. Assim, para mim que falo português, definitivamente os sons são muito diferentes. Eu tô agora no inglês, eu tô no nível B2 e depois pretendo lapidar o meu espanhol, que é um pouco mais avançado, mas seriamente estou pensando em aprender uma terceira língua, no caso, e estou realmente pensando em sueco, porque eu já ouvi e para mim era como uma música muito, muito bonito, mas ao mesmo tempo muito, muito difícil.
A whole lot more often. In Texas, the summers are brutal. 47 degrees Celsius and humid in the summertime in August. No bueno. And it's quite dangerous. In fact, they'll have like weather advisory alerts, and then the pollution gets real bad combined with the humidity and the hot temperatures. So because of that, a lot of people are inside. So if I was going to do things with my friends, it usually involved something like going to the movies, going bowling, eating out, or maybe going for some drinks. And so these a lot of times were unhealthy activities from a physical standpoint. But here in Sweden, because you have nature everywhere, it's a more walkable country, and the temperatures are not as harsh as where I come from. It does get cold in the winter, but it doesn't get as extremely cold as it does in Texas. Because of that, I do find myself outdoors a whole lot more often. Now, if I was in the north of Sweden, it might be a different story in the wintertime. But here in this part of Sweden, I can say that I'm definitely outside a whole lot more often and a whole lot more active than I had been in the States. Number 4, I feel like coming to Sweden has made me a bit more retrospective than I had been in the past. Something that's really bothered me that I really became aware of in the last 3 years. I've been, in August, it'll be 4 years I've been living here, and I noticed after I was here, I had more time to myself. Part of it was I was a bit more isolated because, yeah, I had some friends here in Sweden, but none of my family was here. And the first year I wasn't working, I was just studying Swedish. And then after that, I got a job and started working. But I found that I had a lot more time to myself to really think about things. We also had the COVID pandemic, which made it to where I really wasn't going and doing a whole lot of things. So I was at home a whole lot more often. And what I started to realize is I felt like the last 20 years of my life, from the age of like say 20 all the way up to 40, had just completely flew by. I felt like I lost a lot of time. I feel like looking back at my teenage years, those years moved pretty slowly. My childhood years, those moved pretty slowly. But then that last 20 years just flew by. I felt like my life was completely caught up in my work and my career and being very busy and other activities in my life. And because of that, life just passed me up, and I found it very disturbing. Now being here in Sweden, I feel like I'm a whole lot more retrospective, and I'm living a little bit more in the present. I still have a lot of work to do on that, but that's something that I'm really trying to work on, is taking it easy, spending time really thinking back about the past, about the current, present, and also thinking about the future. So I feel like in Sweden you have more of the prerequisites to be able to do that, whereas in America I just feel like, at least for myself, I don't know how it is for you if you come from the States, it just feels like time just goes so fast, and it's just like everything's about rush, 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 grind, 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 hustle, hustle, hustle. And then here in Sweden, it's a little bit more of a laid back type lifestyle. And so I feel like people are a little bit more contemplative and have a little bit more time to be able to, think about where they've been, where they are, and where they're going. Number 5, I'm a lot more.
Gente, realmente é incrível, porque eu sempre que vejo estadunidenses, né, americanos falando sobre essa questão da diferença, né, do estilo de vida nórdico, né, sueco, em relação ao americano, sempre eles tocam nesse assunto, como nos Estados Unidos você tem uma coisa muito mais corrida, algo que você realmente não para, né? Focado muito mais na questão do trabalho e tudo mais, do que na questão de você parar mais para aproveitar. E é curioso porque ele mesmo fala que ele passou até a olhar mais pro presente, né? Prestar mais atenção nisso. E eu acho que isso está muito ligado também à questão de como influencia até na saúde mental. Porque se você parar para pensar, quando você está muito apressado, né? Você quer resolver tudo ao mesmo tempo, tipo, você pode até se sobrecarregar. E quando você olha mais o presente, né? Você consegue ter mais tempo até mesmo para planejar o seu futuro, mas de uma maneira mais saudável. Eu estava até lendo um livro sobre isso. Eu não me recordo o nome dele agora, mas é um livro muito interessante que fala justamente sobre como focar nessa questão do presente. E é incrível porque observe bem enquanto, né, em outros países a gente precisa realmente trabalhar a nossa mentalidade para a gente se colocar no presente e até diminuir essa ansiedade do que pode acontecer no futuro ou nem viver o presente, né, tão preocupado e tão corrido, mas vocês, ao mesmo tempo, já têm isso naturalmente. Então, eu acho isso realmente fantástico. Diz muito, né, de como é a criação de vocês, de como é o estilo de vida sueco.
More frugal with my spending. I have mixed feelings about this one. So I grew up not having a whole lot of money, and we actually went through a period we were actually homeless for a bit, and so thanks to the goodness of someone that was in our religious congregation, we were provided a home temporarily, and it wasn't for free. We of course had to pay rent, but we were able to find a place kind of last minute. It was tough. Being a teenager was a really tough period of my life, and I won't really go into a whole lot of that. I'll just leave it at that and say it was difficult for obvious reasons of my family not feeling comfortable talking about that and putting that here on YouTube. I won't go into a lot of details on that. But I was used to having to be real careful with money. So, I grew up with a mother who counted coupons. We were getting things that were hand-me-downs from my cousins. I'm wearing clothes that are like, 5-10 years old. We went to thrift stores, and which is funny because now all that stuff is popular, but back in the day I got bullied a lot in school because I didn't have the latest and greatest and new things. And so I even remember being on the playground and kids actually pulling my clothes off and throwing me down on the ground because I was wearing clothes from a thrift store. So I grew up not having much money, and I think what happened was then when I became an adult and then I went to college and then I finally got a job where I was making good money, it felt nice to be making more money, and I didn't really think too much about my spending. I was not one of the type that, goes out clubbing and, shop till you drop. I never did anything like that, but I did purchase a lot of things that I really didn't need. There's a sale on this, so then I would buy that or whatever. And I could find ways to justify making these purchases. On top of that, when I would go to the grocery store, if I wanted something, I bought it. I didn't think much about the price because I made enough money to where I always had money left at the end of the month. After I paid my taxes and everything, I had money left over. Here in Sweden, things cost so much and your salaries are so low and stuff is heavily taxed and so much tax is taken out of your pay. So that has resulted in me having to be a whole lot more careful with my spending. And I'm still working on that. I'm still trying to learn about places where you can go to save money. And, you know, sometimes I will be wanting, for example, a nice steak, but then I look at the prices and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do that today. What is something else that I can do that's going to cost less money? I have a goal in mind. I have some financial goals that I'm aiming towards, and I'm hoping that I can get better about saving money. So I do feel like I'm a lot more conscious of my spending now, and I'm a bit more frugal. Definitely some room for improvement there, but it's hard, you know, these kinds of things, especially when you've grown up, like I said, when you've grown up with, you've been poor, and, you know, and then your parents were poor too, and their parents were poor, and then all of a sudden now you're making a bit more money. I don't know. And on top of that, you know, I'm neurodivergent. I am diagnosed with autism, and now we're screening me for ADHD. And those kinds of diagnoses also make it difficult when it comes to managing your finances. Number 6, I have definitely benefited physically from being in Sweden. So the first thing I can mention is my skin cleared up. So in the States, we have a lot of pollution. We have a lot of chemicals in our drinking water, a lot of chemicals in the food. And I had a lot of skin trouble. In fact, my skin on my scalp would get so bad that it would break open and bleed when I would get out in the sun. I had problems with rashes on my body, eczema. My skin hurt all the time. If I took a shower, it felt like my skin was on fire. And I noticed eating certain foods really flared me up. Then coming to Sweden, my skin cleared up. On top of that, I ended up actually losing weight. I'm still a bit not at my goal. I'm still a bit overweight, but compared to the United States, I'm definitely a whole lot better off than what I was before. On top of that, I also had a lot of gastrointestinal issues, so I was very sensitive to a lot of foods and stuff in food, and so I had irritable bowel syndrome. I still have it, but I don't get the flare-ups that I used to have. In fact, my IBS was so bad that I actually ended up in the emergency room because I would get severe dehydration because I just couldn't keep fluids in my body. Number 7.
Eu vou aproveitar e vou comentar sobre o ponto 5 e 6 juntos, que eu acho que pode estar conectado, ao meu ver, que ele fala sobre a questão de ser caro e como ele aprendeu, né, a controlar melhor os gastos dele por a Suécia ter um salário mais baixo e ter o custo de vida mais alto, que é a questão dos impostos e tudo mais. Eu sempre vi realmente falando que os impostos são mais altos, porém eu já vi pessoas falando que é mais baixo o salário, como ele falou, né? Mas também já vi pessoas falando que o salário é muito condizente com o custo de vida, né? Então, assim, nessa questão, realmente é verdade, né? Os impostos são muito altos, mas quando eu olho para isso, eu vejo duas opções. Você pode falar, os impostos são altos e o governo está levando todo o meu dinheiro. Ou você pode falar, os impostos são altos, mas o governo me traz bons serviços de volta. Então, eu sempre fico pela última opção, né? Pela segunda, porque aqui no meu país a gente paga muito imposto, mas nós não temos o retorno. Então, a gente só fica com a parte que o Estado abocanha o nosso salário, mas não com o retorno disso. Eu acredito que isso está ligado também à questão de saúde mental, porque isso te deixa muito mais tranquilo, né? Por exemplo, ele falou da questão da poluição e tudo mais. Eu sempre fico chocada quando vejo sobre a Suécia. Eu vejo que vocês conseguem aproveitar lugares, praias, lugares para banho no meio da cidade, muito próximo do centro urbano. E eu sempre fico muito chocada com isso, porque eu fico me perguntando, nossa, mas não tem poluição, né, e tudo mais, porque todos estão tomando banho no lugar, então acredito que não deva ser poluído. Eu acho isso realmente muito bom. Se o Brasil pudesse adotar isso, seria realmente uma solução para boa parte do nosso problema.
I've become more outgoing. Now, this is kind of counterintuitive. So I, by nature, am a introvert. And a lot of people don't believe that, but I think when you work in, the healthcare sector, you have to learn to kind of put on your customer service face and learn to interact with people. But the thing I think a lot of people don't understand, they say, well, you're on camera, so you're definitely not an introvert. And it's like, okay, for one thing, talking on camera is one thing. It's not the same as talking to a person because the camera's not talking back to me. I'm not having to worry about what the camera's saying to me. And on top of that, introverts can be talkative people. They can be friendly people. However, it comes at a cost. People that are introverts, it can actually drain their energy to interact with other people, whereas an extrovert actually can get energy from talking to another person. I think that's one of the biggest differences. And so Coming from the States, I found it extremely draining because I felt like pressured to talk to everybody, strangers. You go in the bathroom, at a restaurant, and you're standing next to a guy urinating, and he wants to talk about, the election, and you've never seen this guy, you never will see him again. You get in the elevator, and people want to strike up a conversation, not just "Hi, how are you," but actually want to
Meu
talk to you
Deus.
about deep events that going in the elevator is not going to be enough time to answer those things. Yeah, so it's tough, I think, for someone like myself being in the States because of that culture. But coming to Sweden, it's the opposite. It's a very introverted society. Of course, I believe in the 80-20 rule. The majority of people in Sweden, of course, fit kind of a general thing, but you do have, a sizable number, a considerable number of people that are not like that are outgoing and they are talkative and they are friendly. But overall, generally speaking, the Swedes tend to really appreciate the privateness, and they may not be as outgoing. And it varies from neighborhood to neighborhood, city to city. And then, you go to Bostad, and people are just smiling at you and waving and saying "hey" when they pass you. And I'm like, wow, this is such a change, And then later that day, I ride the train an hour and a half away, come back, and then people look right through you. It's just interesting that in Sweden. But generally speaking, Swedes have a reputation for being pretty private. And I think that has led to is me becoming more outgoing, because you do start to feel a little bit isolated and you do start to appreciate that human interaction. And coming from the States, I think even though I may not fit the stereotypical mold of a typical American, I still am a product of my environment. And so I think, have a little bit of that in me to want to communicate with people. And so I have noticed that I do engage more in small talk. For example, at work, there's a lot more small talk there. And when I worked in the States, I just wanted to come to work, do my job, and go home. Whereas here in Sweden, at work, people want to talk about their families and they want to talk about what their plans were for the weekend. And I'm like, that was not something that I wanted to do when I was in the States. And now I'm actually engaging in that. So that's been a big change for me. Number 8, my self-confidence has increased. So I think coming to another country is such a challenge. If you've never done anything like this before, you really don't know what you're in for. And there's so many hurdles that you have to overcome, especially if you're going to a country that doesn't speak your native language and you have to learn that language. And I've always battled with self-confidence issues. I've always felt like I have imposter syndrome. I always felt like I was less than. I always felt like, I've always struggled with low self-esteem. And I think coming to Sweden has really helped me, because now, I can look at this and see all these things that I've actually accomplished and be like, okay, now I have stronger confidence in doing a lot of other things that I probably wouldn't have been confident otherwise. Number 9, I drive a lot less. So I do have a car. I have a very old car, and I do need it for example, creating YouTube content. I do go out into the forest. That was kind of one of my big things of coming to Sweden, is to be able to go out in the countryside. And so you kind of need a car to be able to do that. And so I do drive, but I don't drive nearly as much. Coming from Texas, there's really not much of a walkability there. Even riding your bicycle is really not a thing. There are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, it's kind of dangerous to walk and ride your bike everywhere. And so you end up driving your cars. It's also long distances between places. Coming in Sweden, things are a lot more accessible. You have really good, what they call collective traffic, or community transportation. So I find that I'm reliant on that more. I'm walking more, riding my bicycle more. Number 10, I'm a lot more appreciative of the sunlight.
Gente, é verdade. Ele fala, né, que na Suécia é muito mais fácil para você estar usando outros tipos de transporte que não o carro, porque acaba que a cidade é até mais adaptável para isso. E, de fato, assim, eu percebo isso, né, em vários vídeos eu vejo isso também, mas como é importante, né, você também ter essa questão de disponibilizar essas opções, né, para as pessoas. Acredito que se não tivesse todo esse esforço que há na Suécia para as pessoas poderem estar utilizando outras coisas, talvez nem seria assim, né? Talvez a cultura de vocês não teria se desenvolvido dessa maneira, mas realmente é muito curioso ver isso. Aqui no Brasil é a mesma coisa, né? Já falei isso em vários vídeos, a gente não tem essa cultura de pegar a bicicleta e tudo mais, é uma coisa realmente muito, muito restrita. Ciclovias também são muito delimitadas, então tudo não contribui para isso, definitivamente.
So, coming from state of Texas, where it gets so hot, you're finding every opportunity to get out of the sun and get in the shade or go in the air conditioning. Whereas here in Sweden, it's interesting to see how people are like, they're almost like lizards that are like bathing out in the sun on a stone, soaking up the rays in the wintertime. Any little bit of sun that comes out. And I'm finding that that is something that has started to happen to me. And I'm realizing I do appreciate the sun a whole lot more. Those are just 10 ways that I think that living in Sweden has positively influenced me as an American. And I would love to hear from you guys. If you have moved to Sweden from somewhere else, are there some ways that you have changed as well moving to this country? Don't forget to like this video if you found it helpful and interesting. It really does help me out a whole lot, and it doesn't cost you anything. And I hope you take care of yourself and take care of others. Have a wonderful
Gente, é incrível. Eu realmente fico muito encantada com isso, porque ele apenas está confirmando muitas das coisas que a gente já vê nos vídeos, né? Tipo, coisas que realmente afirmam, que colocam como a sociedade, a cultura de vocês é desenvolvida, né? Muitos pontos aqui eu vejo que está super conectado, interligado. Na verdade, eu acho que nada está solto na cultura de vocês. No final, analisando tudo, eu vejo que é como se tivesse realmente um mundo conectado, sabe? Tudo faz sentido, tudo existe um propósito, as coisas aqui não são feitas de qualquer forma, né? Pelo contrário, vocês têm essa questão de regras, mas ao mesmo tempo vocês são muito flexíveis também, e a forma como vocês respeitam, né, o espaço do outro. Eu acho isso tão bonito porque vocês até evitam, né, de acontecer alguma coisa desagradável, justamente por vocês já ter esse princípio de respeito básico ao espaço do outro. É realmente fantástico e maduro da parte de vocês. Mas eu concordo com ele, a Suécia realmente é um lugar muito diferente, né, de outros países. No caso, ele dá o exemplo do país dele aqui, mas o meu também se encaixa nessa questão de diferença, realmente muito forte. Mas cada vez que eu vejo, mais eu fico encantada, porque são coisas que reafirmam, né, a admiração que eu já tenho por vocês, mas não é uma admiração que nasce apenas de uma coisa de se admirar, sabe? Não é isso. É uma coisa onde eu vejo que há propósitos, né, no estilo de vida de vocês e na cultura de vocês. Isso torna tudo para mim muito, muito enriquecedor. Mas, bom, esse foi a minha reação. Eu espero que você tenha gostado desse vídeo. Se você gostou, considere se inscrever. Eu vou adorar ter você por aqui. E se você já foi inscrito, não esquece de ativar as notificações. Obrigada por assistir esse vídeo e nos vemos na próxima reação. Tchau!